everybody. Welcome to your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm your host, Jean Chatzky. Very glad to have all of you with me today. We're going to be diving in, as we often do, to the topic of retirement, specifically to the topic of retirement spending. Retirement is a world that is full of unknowns about your health, unknowns about how much or how long you'll be able to or want to work, unknowns about how long you'll live. That's a biggie. And all of those unknowns come together and produce a puzzle for people when it comes to how much money they can actually spend while simultaneously making sure that their money lasts as long as they do. It can be confounding, but there are some answers and there are some tricks that you can use, some information that you can use to wrap your brain around it so that you create a roadmap for yourself that is simply easier to navigate. I know a lot about this because I've learned from my guest today. Michael Finke is professor of wealth management and the Frank M. Engel Chair of Economic Security at the American College of Financial Services. He is also a fellow with the Alliance for Lifetime Income, and his research has shown that retirees are so afraid of outliving their savings that many of them, if not most of them, actually underspend. But as I said, there are ways around this. There are things that you can do so that you put yourself on an easier road. And Michael's here today. He's going to dig into it with us. Michael, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, Jean. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you.
I want to remind our audience that we like this to be a conversation that is collaborative. We like your participation. Some folks are already chiming in and letting us know that they are here. So thank you so much for that. We're always eager to talk to you. If you've got a question, if you've got a comment, please post it in the comments. I'll weave it into the conversation. And if it's a question, then maybe Michael can even give you an answer that helps you get on your way. You know, I've seen a lot of statistics on this from your research. You published a paper called Guaranteed Income, a License to Spend. You worked with David Blanchett, who's been on this show before. He's also a researcher in this space. And among the things that you wrote about, a huge number of households could actually increase their spending if they took some steps to put some guaranteed income in place. People don't understand how long they're going to live. Why is this such a puzzle for people?
Well, I mean, we could talk about 100 different aspects of this topic, but let's start with the very beginning, which is we are now in the defined contribution era, which means that people save for retirement in their 401k plan. And when they get to retirement, they have a big lump sum of money. When in prior generations, workers would contribute money to a pension. And then when they got to retirement, the pension would pay them a certain amount of money every month for the rest of their lives. So what was different about that? Well, they knew that they could spend the entire value of their pension and they would not have to worry about running out because it would continue no matter how long they lived. And in today's world, now, a lot of things about today's world are better. We have control over how much money we're saving for retirement. We control when we retire. We can control, how we invest, and we have greater autonomy. But greater autonomy means that we have greater responsibility for managing that money to create an income, to create a lifestyle after retirement. And frankly, that is not easy. Now, you just mentioned the problem. We don't know how long we're going to live. We don't know what investment returns are going to be. We don't know what our spending needs are going to be exactly. That's a pretty big list of unknowns that make it very complex. And oftentimes what people do is they will, or at least in prior generations when people had Social Security and maybe a little bit of a pension, they would rely on the lump sum as an emergency. So they would spend from their pension, and then if things got bad, then they would pull money out. If there was a medical emergency or if there was a big expense, then they'd pull money out of their savings. But now, if all we have is Social Security, we have to develop a plan for pulling money out of our savings if we're going to come close to maintaining the same lifestyle that we had before we retired. And that, to me, is my biggest fear, is that people are not going to feel comfortable, especially those who have accumulated a significant amount of savings. Are you going to be able to live well if you're pulling money out of your investments every month to fund that lifestyle?
I think when we look at pulling money out of our investments each month to fund that lifestyle, we feel, many of us, as if we're on a precarious path because the rules of thumb that we've been given in the past, and you've written about these, don't always hold up. For years, we were told, oh, if you pull 4% out, adjusting it for inflation, you'll be fine. And then we were told, well, actually, no, the number's not really 4%, it's lower than that. And then we had 2022 where everything took a dive. And it, how do we get on a path where we know that we will be able to pull out enough money every month? Is there a rule of, I don't even want to ask for a rule of thumb because I don't think that's the answer. Is there a methodology to follow?
When we think about rules of thumb, like the 4% rule, the one piece of information that the 4% rule does not take into account is what has happened after you retired. So let me just give you as an example. Let's say you had two retirees. They each had saved $1 million. One of them retires on January 1st, 2022, and they think they can withdraw $40,000 per year plus inflation from their $1 million portfolio. The other retiree decides they're going to wait a few months. They retire on May 30th, 2022, and they now have $800,000 because the market has fallen in that time period. Now, they follow the same rule of thumb, and they can spend $32,000 per year because their portfolio has fallen from $1 million to $800,000. Now, that's not rational, is it? Because they actually have more money in the bank now because they haven't been spending money for the last 5 months. So for them, they're in a better position than the one who originally retired on January 1st and thought they could spend $40,000 per year, when in reality, they now have, $780,000, and they could not afford the same retirement if they had retired on June 1st. That means that the big problem with these rule of thumb ideas is that they're not flexible. They don't incorporate the possibility that if the markets do poorly or if the markets do well, you can adjust your spending upward or downward. So none of us knows what investment returns are going to be at the beginning of retirement. We have to adjust to them. Some financial advisors use what are known as guardrails. So they might start out at 4%, but if the market does poorly, they'll give you maybe a 0.5% guardrail. You can go down to 3.5%. Or if the market does well, you can go up to 4.5%. And really, that's not a bad way to adjust your spending up and down in retirement. It's very similar to what the IRS actually forces a lot of people to do, which is the required minimum distribution. Those are dependent on two pieces of information. One is your average expected longevity, your remaining longevity. The other piece of information is how much money you still have in your retirement savings. And that's not a bad rule of thumb, but it also means that as you get older, the percentage of your remaining savings that you're going to pull out can go up because your lifespan is not as great. But boy, this is not easy. Like, this is pretty close to being rocket science. And to expect the average American worker to be able to do this on their own without either underspending, which I think is just as bad as overspending. Overspending means we're at risk of running out. Underspending means that we're at risk of not living as well as we could have lived.
Can you talk a little bit about the degree to which you find people are underspending? You and I were talking in advance of this call, and I was telling you about my mother. My mother is 83 years old. And she is so excited about the fact that she has as much money in her retirement account today as she had when my dad retired, when she was in her 60s, right? Like, that is so exciting for her. But it also may mean that she's not living as well as she could be living. And believe me, my mom's living fine. But maybe she could, she feels bad when she goes out and buys an expensive pocketbook, and she probably doesn't have to.
Well, I have done interviews with retirees. A few years ago, I did interviews with retirees and asked them about spending. And I very often would get that answer, exactly that answer. They were so proud of the fact that they weren't spending very much, that 10 years into retirement, they had more money than they did when they started retirement. And they would look at me as if I should say that you're doing great, good job, you're not spending very much. You're going out to the early bird dinners, or, you're not staying at the expensive room on the cruise ship, and you are not spending down your savings. So I asked them, well, you must really want to give that money to your kids. And oftentimes they would say, well, no, that's not why we're not spending the money. That we have to pay for college. They've got plenty of money. And then I would ask, all right, so what is the third option? Is there a third option that I don't know about? And to an economist like myself, we're maybe overly rational. And we think, if I don't spend it, then I'm going to give it away after I die. And, do I think that someone else is going to have as much happiness from spending my money as I would during retirement? Is that really what I want out of my goal? And that's one of the reasons why I think, yes, if you have a goal to pass money on, then figure out how to do that with part of your savings. But with the remainder of your savings, the goal should be lifestyle. So let's say you take a part, it's your legacy. You take another part, that's emergencies and liquidity. And then there's a part of your portfolio, and you put a label on it and you say, this is the part I'm going to spend down. Now, the only part that's a problem of that is that you don't know how long the money is going to last. You don't know exactly how much you can safely spend every month. And, this is one of those reasons why it can be useful to rely on an institution to manage that longevity risk for you as the individual. And the reason you do that is so that you can spend more every year.
Okay, so I want to break this down, because what you're essentially talking about is you've got a chunk of money. This is your money to live on for the rest of your life. And there are two different paths that you can take with this money. You can invest it yourself. You can leave it in your IRA. And if you do that, you basically have to go down the road that you were describing before. In the years where the market tumbles a little bit, you spend less. In the years where the market does incredibly well, you spend a little more, but there's some management involved. Or you offload the responsibility for managing some or all of this chunk of money to an insurance company. And the way that we do that is through an annuity. Explain the difference in mindset and why offloading that risk allows you to spend more.
Yeah, the analogy that I've given in the past is, what if you have a kid who is having a birthday party, and you have one birthday cake, and you know that there's going to be somewhere between 5 and 40 kids that are going to show up to the birthday party.
I
And you
hope
have
it's at your house.
well, you have to cut each kid a slice of cake. And the first kid walks through the door, and you know that on average 20 kids are going to come through the door. But you also know that 35 kids could come in, 38 kids could come in, and 40 kids could come in. You don't want to run out. So you're going to cut a smaller slice of cake for the first kid. And then you're going to cut a small slice of cake for the second kid. And by the time you get to the 30th kid, you're going to be cutting smaller and smaller pieces of cake because you're worried that you're going to run out. Now, what if instead you could delegate that risk to a bakery and say, I'll make you an agreement. I'll pay a little bit more for the cake. But if more than 20 kids show up, you have to show up with a second birthday cake. And so the bakery says, all right, and then you get to cut each birthday cake into 20 pieces. And then if the 21st kid comes through the door, then you can continue to cut bigger slices of cake and you don't have to worry about running out. That is the value of delegating what we like to call an idiosyncratic risk to an institution. In this case, the idiosyncratic risk is not knowing how many kids are going to show up to the birthday party. But in retirement, you don't know how many years of spending you need to fund. So rationally, what you're going to do is you're going to cut smaller slices of cake. And that means that from your savings, you're going to spend less every year than if you delegated that to an institution like an insurance company, in which case you could spend to the average expected longevity. So essentially spend as if you're going to live to the age of 90 if you're a healthy 65-year-old woman, which means you get to spend more every year. And then if you live beyond 90, then you can continue to receive checks.
You actually looked at the spending of people for your paper. You compared the spending of people with pensions, which is a form of an annuity, right, to people who have their money invested in retirement accounts. And I was really pretty surprised at the degree of difference
Yes.
between the amount that those people spend. I mean, it was not just a couple $100s.
Yeah, in some cases about twice as much. So let's say, let me make this very simple. So right now, if you go online and you price out how much it costs to buy income, if you have, say, $500,000 and you're a healthy 65-year-old woman, then you can get about $35,000 a year in income. And that essentially is the, if you had invested in the kind of things that insurance companies invest in, corporate bonds, if you'd invested in those types of assets until age 90, then that's about how much income you could generate. But what we found was that if you had $500,000 in the bank, you would spend about half as much as if you spent the $35,000 that someone received from a pension. They're both equivalent in terms of the amount of retirement wealth. Remember, a pension is retirement wealth. If you've got a pension of $35,000 a year, you're going to live a lot better than someone who's got $100,000 in the bank because you have a pension that's worth $500,000. But for someone who has $500,000 versus someone who has $35,000 a year of income, the one with $35,000 of income is going to spend significantly more every year because they don't have the birthday cake problem. They don't have to conserve their spending. They conserve their wealth to make sure that it doesn't run out because they don't know how long they're going to live.
And they are likely to live a lot longer than they think they're going to live. When Michael and I were talking prior to this interview, you said, I look at a lot of mortality tables, which good for you. I don't look at a lot of mortality
tables. Not very good at parties. Yeah.
But mortality tables aren't really giving us the full story, are they?
Well, so when you say mortality tables, which mortality table are you referring to? Now, this is the big
average,
problem.
Right? If we look at averages, and when we read the newspaper, when we pick up, Time magazine, when we read the popular press, often things that are quoted to us are averages.
Right.
But as you point out, the people who have defined contribution retirement plans, the people who have 401ks and IRAs are not the average people, right? And that means you're going to live longer. Can you explain?
Right. So, I mean, there is the Social Security mortality table, which says that, say, an average woman is going to live to the age of 85, an average man is going to live to the age of 83. Those are not the average ages of longevity for someone who participates in a 401k plan. For them, it might be 4 years beyond that, or maybe even a little bit more. So for the kind of people who are tuning in today, who are watching this show, who are actually worried about the possibility of running out of savings because they have built a nest egg for themselves in their retirement plan, they're going to live longer than the average American, which means that they have to use different expectations. Now, when I say mortality table, what I'm thinking about is a bell curve. So a bell curve is a distribution of how long you're going to live. Let's say you retire at the age of 65. On average, you're going to live 25 years. Most people will live somewhere around that 25 years. That's the bell part of the bell curve. But for a healthy 65-year-old woman, she's got about a 27% chance that she's going to live to the age of 95. She's got about a 10% chance that she's going to live to the age of 100. So what does she do when she's planning out her income? Does she plan to make it last to the age of 100, in which case she's still got a 10% chance of running out? Or does she plan on having it last to the age of 95? The more conservative you are, the less you're actually going to spend from your savings. And if you can delegate that longevity risk to an insurance company, then you can actually spend more of the amount of money that you have allocated for the goal of spending.
When you look at that money that you have allocated for the goal of spending, are you suggesting that we take all of that money and annuitize, or are we taking a portion of it and annuitizing while trying to make the rest of it keep up with inflation? Like how do you do the math on that?
So I think you have multiple goals at the beginning of retirement. You've got legacy, you've got an emergency fund, you've got, maybe a certain amount that you're going to allocate towards healthcare expenses. You set that out at the very beginning of retirement, but then there's going to be a slice where the main goal is income. Now, an economist would say that you should take all of that money and buy an annuity with it. And in fact, it is a puzzle that more people don't do that. It's called the annuity puzzle. There's a great article that was written by Richard Thaler, Nobel Prize winning economist, in the New York Times called The Annuity Puzzle, that lays out very simply this idea of why it's a puzzle that people don't annuitize the remainder of that. Now, there's many different types of annuity products. There, you can just simply buy an income, essentially like buying a pension. So I trade $500,000 and I get $35,000 a year. Or you can get a fixed type of annuity that has a lifetime withdrawal benefit. And with that, you maintain a certain amount of liquidity. You pay a certain amount of money for the right to be able to withdraw from that account every month in retirement. And then if the account falls to zero, you can continue to withdraw that amount. And you can also get one of those lifetime withdrawal benefits on what's known as a variable annuity. And a variable annuity is an annuity that has that potential for upside because you can invest in stocks or other types of riskier investments, but it will also provide some sort of a lower lifetime income benefit. Now, it's going to be lower because you get that potential for upside, and it really is just a safety net if the markets do very poorly, especially early on in retirement.
Another factor in the equation is Social Security. And we got a question from Lisa. She's been very patient, so I want to bring it into the conversation. If you're watching and you've got a question, throw it into the comments and we'll try to get to it as well. She said, regarding annuities, guaranteed income versus variable, is one better than the other? I have stocks and a dividend appreciating mutual fund. I'm cutting back on work in November. I plan to take my Social Security at 66 and 10 months in 2 years. I should be able to save my Social Security and live off a part-time job, dividends, and alimony. I figure I can save about $100,000 by taking Social Security at that age rather than waiting. And she also adds she should not have to touch her principal until at least age 75. Is there a component to this picture that you think is missing?
Well, first of all, there are some great ideas in there, and there are some common wrong ideas about retirement income. So let's start with the great ideas first, and that is Social Security is an annuity. People say, well, I hate annuities, and they love their Social Security. Social Security is just an annuity that is provided by the federal government. And it's also an inflation-protected annuity. So it's a very valuable source of a foundation of income for a household. And the way you essentially buy more of that annuity is you delay claiming Social Security. And in fact, I did a recent study where I showed that a lot of those rules that define how much benefit, how much extra income you get for delayed claiming, those were created in the early 1980s when interest rates were higher, when people didn't live as long. So they're actually a little bit overly generous. So especially people who have a significant amount of savings and are going to live longer than the average American, for them, delaying Social Security is basically like having more money in the bank. It means you're increasing your retirement wealth. So I love that instinct. I love the idea to pull money out of your IRA, to bridge spending, say, between if you retire at 65 and Social Security kicks in 70, bridge spending for those 5 years from your IRA savings. Then you're going to have fewer problems with required minimum distributions because you're going to spend down some of that money ahead of time. I think that's a great idea. Now, using dividend stocks to create an income. Now, if you want to Google how economists think about this, we use a term known as the dividend irrelevance theorem. What is the dividend irrelevance theorem? Well, that says that anybody can create their own dividends simply by selling a portion of their stock portfolio. All a dividend is a forced sale periodically of a portion of your stock portfolio. So it may not be exactly when you want it or when you need it. And it's also tax inefficient if you're not spending the money when the dividend is issued. Because even though the tax rate is favored, if you have to reinvest that lower amount, you're actually going to lose about 0.2% every year because of that tax drag. So dividend stocks are really not ideal as a way of creating income. They're going to go up and down just like any other stock investment will. And they create this fixation on your nest egg value that I think it steers people into harmful directions. Because if they put too much of their portfolio in just dividend stocks, that tends to be a certain type of older industry that may be affected negatively by a consumer recession. So it's what's known as increasing the amount of idiosyncratic risk in your investment portfolio. It's actually less efficient as an investment strategy. And the other thing that I think people can do is they can invest in higher yield bonds because they want to draw higher yield from those investments. But historically, higher yield bonds really are not a great investment if your focus is on total return after tax of the portfolio. It's better actually to have a portfolio of treasury bills or treasury bonds and a well-diversified portfolio of international stocks. You're actually going to be able to, over the long run, take more money out for income using that type of a portfolio strategy. But you still are at risk of outliving your savings if the stock market goes down and you live a long time. And if that happens, you're going to have to cut back. So, if the market falls, like we have a 2008 scenario where the market falls by 50%, and you're still expected to live 25 or 30 years in retirement, what are you going to do? You're going to cut back. So it doesn't get rid of the risk of having to cut back.
Okay, one more. Jordana writes, I'm trying to help my parents understand that Social Security alone will not be enough to cover their living expenses in retirement, especially my mom who wants to retire early. Finally got them a financial advisor. Now I think they should ask about annuities and other ways to earn an extra paycheck after your earning years. You mentioned earlier in our conversation that people are not good at this.
No.
That we're, when it comes to accumulation, I actually think that's a lot easier to understand than decumulation, than making your money last. It's also emotionally, at least where you're not operating out of fear, you're operating out of greed, potentially. What's the role of a financial advisor in this conversation? How important is it to not try to do this yourself?
Well, I think first of all, thinking in terms of income instead of in terms of a lump sum is far more accurate. So, if you ask anybody on the street who is better off at retirement, someone who's got $1 million or someone who's got a public sector pension of $80,000 a year, they'll say, well, the millionaire is going to be better off, and you're going to say, well, no, actually, that $80,000 a year is more valuable for someone who retires at the age of 65 than the $1 million. And thinking in terms of income also reminds you of how expensive retirement is. Now, it is expensive, and there's no way around it. There's no magic pill that is going to make retirement cheaper. If you want to maintain the same lifestyle that you had before you retired, you're going to have to save up a significant amount of money. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that you could work for 30 years and retire for 20 years and not have to save a significant amount of money during your working years to do that. And the market simply, you can't rely on the market to simply bail you out, because the market gives and the market takes away, and you have to live with whatever returns the market is going to give you during your retirement. So the market risk is not a solution. Saving more is a solution. And what an advisor can do is actually sit down with you, put together a plan where they put in realistic assumptions, figure out how much you need to save, what is a reasonable retirement age. Especially since people are living longer now than they have in the past. We've gained about a year of longevity after the age of 65, about every decade in the United States. So today's retiree is going to live significantly longer than their parents or grandparents. And it may be appropriate for them to retire, more like 67 or 68 instead of 62 or 63. That has a dual advantage. It means you've got an additional 5 or 6 years of saving, and it means your expected lifespan is going to be 5 or 6 years less. So you're going to have more money and you're going to need less money because you're not going to live quite as long.
That mind shift that you described, getting people to think in terms of income rather than in terms of a lump sum, is not something that comes especially naturally. What points of data do you need to get yourself over the hill?
What I do a lot also, in addition to looking at mortality tables, I look at annuity quotes. So anybody can go online and get an immediate annuity quote as a frame of reference. So if I have $500,000 in savings, I am, say, 55 years old, and I want to see how much income I can buy at the age of 65, I can go online and do that. That's what's known as a deferred income annuity. And I can estimate, if I have in fact, this is how much of a geek I am.
I do this too. I like immediateannuities.com. I like that site, right? Like I like those.
Yes, there's a lot of great sites. There's Blueprint. But what you can do is you can just go on there and it gives you a very clear idea of how expensive it is to buy income. And by the way, it's less depressing now than it was a year ago because interest rates are higher. That means that if I have a certain amount of money, I can say, all right, I can buy this amount of income when I hit age 65, but I can lock it in right now if I want to. And as an added bonus, if you do that in non-qualified money, then it's not subject to taxation. So one of the disadvantages of CDs or bond-like investments having a higher interest rate is that you pay more taxes right now, but you're not going to use the money until you retire. But in our non-qualified savings, which is like money that's in a CD or in a savings account, if I use that to buy an annuity in the future, I don't have to pay taxes on the growth, the assumed growth in that money between now and whenever the income begins. And I think that's actually one of the most underappreciated financial planning tools, is the value of an annuity as a way of achieving tax-deferred growth.
For people who say, okay, but what if I die between now and then? What does the economist say to them?
Well, I mean, you can get a return of premium option, which especially if you buy one younger in life, is not that expensive. So in other words, if I put in $250,000 to be able to buy myself, $25,000 of income 8 years in the future, and I die between now and then my estate will get the full amount of money that I put into the annuity. They'll get the $250,000 back. And it doesn't have a huge impact it'll reduce the amount of money that I get every month when I retire, but it's not going to reduce it so much that it's going to bother me. What might have bothered me is that I got diagnosed with cancer when I was 59 and I have to worry about the fact that the money is gone.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, we're gonna wrap this up here, Michael. This has been so interesting. 3 takeaways from people who are thinking, all right, I've listened to this conversation. I'm understanding more about annuities. I'm understanding more about spending in retirement. What do you want them to do?
Well, I mean, do a little bit of research. Now, if you Google annuities, you might get some information from people who are motivated to manage your investments and not necessarily encourage you to buy an income annuity, which is why I think it's so important to do some objective reading. So, read about the annuity puzzle, read about what the products are all about, why they were created, the history of the product. For example, a variable annuity was actually created by an economist named William Greenall back in the early 1950s because it was an ideal design for creating income from a risky portfolio after retirement. So these were created for a reason. They're insurance products that are like any other insurance products. They're meant to protect the individual, to allow them to avoid the risk and live better. But get a little bit of a better sense for, first of all, how much income you can buy, how expensive is income, and then understand a little bit more about what the products offer as an alternative to trying to do it on your own.
Fantastic. Michael, if we want more of you, of your work, if people want to read your paper, Guaranteed Income, A License to Spend, where do we go?
Well, I mean, a lot of my research is on the Retirement Income Institute webpage. I have my own webpage, which is michaelfinke.com. And a lot of my academic research is on Social Science Research Network, which is ssrn.com.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And if you're looking for more information from us or about this conversation specifically, you can go to protectedincome.org/Finke. Thanks so much for watching. Mike, thanks for doing this. We'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.